I didn't come here to impress anyone. I didn't come here to be brave or extraordinary or impressive. I came here because something inside me whispered, there is more for you than the life you already know. And even though my English was broken and my confidence was fragile, and my future felt like a story I had not learned how to tell yet, my dream was clear. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. Sometimes clarity doesn't shout. Sometimes it speaks softly, like a memory you haven't lived yet. I remember the moment I realized I was going to leave. It didn't feel like a decision. It felt like a direction. Like my life had already begun leaning forward, and all I had to do was follow the lean. People think that when you leave your country the hardest part is packing your bags. But the real weight is the invisible one. The part you carry in your chest. The part that doesn't fit inside a suitcase. Your language. Your laughter. Your sense of belonging. Your memories of home, all tangled together like the roots of a tree. When I left, I didn't understand that I wasn't just moving to another country. I was moving toward a different version of myself. One I had never met. One I wasn't sure I was ready to become. One I hoped, quietly, would know how to survive in a new world. People say courage is loud. But mine wasn't. My courage was small, quiet, shaking, holding onto a dream with hands that weren't steady yet. And yes, my English was bad. Sometimes the words tripped over each other. Sometimes they fell apart halfway. Sometimes they didn't come out at all. But my dream didn't depend on perfect words. It depended on faith, on persistence, on the kind of inner voice that doesn't need translation because it's not made of language, it's made of truth. So this is the story of what happened next. Not the glamorous version. Not the version people post online. But the real version. The fear. The confusion. The effort. The silence. The winter. The loneliness. The growing. The becoming. Because I did not know it at the time, but the moment I stepped into this new life I was beginning a journey that would reshape everything, including the way I cry. I cried during my first winter as an immigrant, but now I cry for different reasons. Before I left, my life was ordinary in the kind of way you only appreciate after it's gone. I woke up to familiar sounds. Doors closing softly. Voices in the hallway. A kettle heating water. A neighbor sweeping the sidewalk before the city fully opened its eyes. Back then, I didn't stop to notice any of it. I didn't know those sounds were the soundtrack to a life I belonged to. I had a routine. One I sometimes complained about. One I thought was too small for me. I thought the world existed somewhere else. Somewhere far away, somewhere louder, somewhere with more space for me to grow. And maybe I was right. But I didn't know what I was trading. I had people, not many but enough. People who understood what I meant even when I didn't finish a sentence. People who could read my silence. People who had memories that overlapped with mine, like pages from the same book. Friends you don't have to impress. Family you don't have to translate yourself for. Laughter that rises from inside you without thinking. I didn't know how valuable that was. I thought identity was something I carried no matter where I went. I thought I was the constant, the stable, unchanging core of myself. But identity is relational. It lives between you and others. In the way someone calls your name. In the warmth of being understood without explaining. In the comfort of belonging by default. And when you leave, you don't just lose a place. You lose the version of yourself that existed in that place. Before I left, I believed I was strong. I believed I was ready. I believed that my dream was sharp enough to cut through any obstacle. And honestly, my dream was clear. That part hasn't changed. I wanted more. Not more money, not more success, not more status, just more life. I wanted to see myself in a different world. To stretch. To expand. To outgrow the limits around me. But I didn't realize that growth sometimes feels like breaking. That expanding sometimes feels like losing pieces of yourself along the way. That change is rarely gentle. There was a day I remember clearly. The air smelled like rain. People moved slowly as if the sky itself was heavy. I was sitting by a window watching droplets form and slide down the glass. And I thought, is this all there is for me? Not in bitterness. Not in disappointment. Just a quiet question. A curiosity. A wondering. I didn't hate my life. I didn't want to escape. But something inside me was restless, like a bird pressing against the inside of its own chest. I think every immigrant recognizes that feeling. That moment when staying becomes harder than leaving. Not because life is bad, but because something inside you refuses to stay unchanged. And so, I made the decision. Not in one dramatic moment. Not with tears or speeches. But slowly, over weeks, months, like a story unfolding on its own. I told the people closest to me. Some were proud. Some were worried. Some didn't understand. But how could they? I barely understood myself. I remember packing. Not the clothes. That part was easy. The hardest things to pack are the invisible ones. The memory of your street. The voices that shaped your laughter. The smell of food that feels like love. The softness of being known. There are things you don't know you are taking with you until you realize you never really left them behind. And there are things you don't know you are leaving behind until you feel the absence of them like gravity. On the day I left, I looked around, really looked. At faces. At walls. At streets. At the sky. And I saw them differently, as if I was already remembering them. Goodbyes don't happen when you say the words. Goodbyes happen in the quiet moments afterward, when the door closes, when the plane lifts, when the city below gets smaller and smaller until it becomes a map you can no longer touch. I didn't cry when I left. Not then. I didn't know yet that leaving isn't something you feel in the moment. Leaving reveals itself slowly, in pieces, over days, over months. In cold mornings. In empty rooms. In the silence of winter. I thought the hardest part would be learning English. I thought the hardest part would be working. I thought the hardest part would be adapting. But the hardest part was realizing that the person I was back then would not survive in the life I was stepping into. I had to become someone new. Not by choice but by necessity. And I didn't know yet what that transformation would cost. The decision to immigrate didn't happen in one moment. It wasn't a bold announcement or a sudden realization. It was something quieter, like a slow shift in the air. For a long time I carried the thought silently. Not because I was hiding it but because I didn't know how to explain it. How do you explain a calling? How do you put into words the feeling that your life is preparing to change before you ever choose to change it? I remember sitting alone many evenings thinking about the person I was becoming. Not the person I was supposed to be. Not the person others thought I should be. But the person I felt trying to emerge, like something inside me was stretching, reaching for something it couldn't yet see. Leaving wasn't about rejecting my home. It wasn't about running from anything. It wasn't about believing that life somewhere else was better. It was about growth. About movement. About answering something inside that kept whispering. Go. There is more. Try. That whisper didn't let me sleep sometimes. I looked around at my life. The familiar rooms, familiar faces. I love them. I still do. But I felt like I was living inside a story that had stopped changing. I was repeating days. Repeating conversations. Repeating myself. And something inside me refused to stay small. We don't talk about this part often because it's easier to say, I went for a better life. But the truth is more complicated. I went because I felt I was meant to. And yet, the closer the decision got, the heavier everything felt. Telling my family was the hardest part. Not because they didn't support me, but because love makes distance feel heavier. I remember the look in their eyes. A mixture of pride and fear. The kind of look that says, I want you to fly, even though I'm afraid of how far the sky might take you. I tried to be strong. I tried to smile. I tried to act like I knew exactly what I was doing. But inside I was trembling. Not because I doubted my dream, but because dreams require sacrifice. No one talks about how painful it is to choose yourself. We had a small gathering before I left. Nothing grand. Just people who mattered. Food that tasted like home. Laughter that felt familiar. I remember watching everyone not as if I were in the moment, but as if I were already remembering it. Have you ever had that feeling? Where the present already feels like a memory? That's when I realized, I had already left in my heart. My body just needed time to follow. The airport was quiet in a way that made time feel slower. I remember holding my passport with hands that didn't feel like mine. I remember thinking, once I go through that gate, I cannot go back to the person I was. And I was right. I hugged the people I loved. Not tightly enough, because we never hug tightly enough when we don't know what distance will mean yet. There were no dramatic tears. No rushed speeches. Just a long silence heavy with everything we didn't know how to say. When I finally boarded the plane, my chest felt full and empty at the same time. I looked out the window as the ground grew smaller. As everything I knew turned into shapes, then colors, then clouds. I wasn't afraid of the journey. I wasn't afraid of starting over. I was afraid of losing myself somewhere along the way. On the plane, memories came like waves. Childhood laughter. Family dinners. Late-night conversations. Warm kitchens. Familiar streets. Things I had never appreciated enough suddenly felt sacred. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. I just sat there, feeling everything. People think immigration starts when you arrive. But it doesn't. Immigration begins the moment you realize you are no longer who you were, and not yet who you are becoming. It is the in-between that shapes you. The leaving. The waiting. The silent in-between. That is where dreams crystallize. Where fear meets courage. Where identity begins to unravel and form again. And my English, yes, it was bad. Words felt heavy. Sentences came out tangled. I repeated myself. I paused too long. I smiled to fill silence. But my dream didn't need perfect grammar. It needed heart. It needed endurance. It needed willingness. And I had that, even when I doubted everything else. So I sat there on that plane, not knowing what my new life would look like, but knowing I was walking directly into the unknown with nothing to protect me except hope. And somehow, hope was enough. When the plane landed, I expected to feel something: excitement, fear, accomplishment. But instead I felt stillness. Not peace, just stillness. The kind of quiet you feel inside your chest when the world around you is too big to understand yet. The airport felt cold, not in temperature but in atmosphere. Everything moved fast. People walking with purpose, eyes focused, voices clipped and efficient. No one looked around. No one lingered. No one observed. Everyone seemed to know exactly where they were going. I didn't. I remember holding my documents like they were the only solid thing I had left. My luggage felt lighter than the weight in my chest. I walked slowly, afraid of doing something wrong. Afraid of being seen. Afraid of being misunderstood. And then came the first moment, the first interaction, the first test. Someone spoke to me. Their words came fast. Too fast. Quicker than my ears and mind could translate. I froze. I tried to speak back, but the sentence broke halfway through. I could hear my accent, thick, unfamiliar even to myself in this new environment. The person repeated their question, not unkindly but with impatience. And that impatience felt like a crack in my chest. I nodded, smiled, pointed, anything to make the moment pass. And then I walked away with a new understanding. My voice did not belong here yet. Outside, the air hit me like a wall. Cold. Sure. Unfamiliar. The kind of cold that gets inside your bones before you have a chance to brace yourself. I remember the color of the sky, a washed-out gray that felt like silence made visible. The city was loud, cars, distant sirens, engines, footsteps. But somehow inside me there was only silence. A deep silence. The silence of being unknown. Where I came from, even strangers held familiarity, shared language, shared culture, shared understanding. Here I was a blank space. A name no one knew how to pronounce, a story no one had context for, a presence that didn't echo anywhere yet. I stayed with people who had already been here longer. They knew the routines. They knew the systems. They moved like they belonged even if they didn't feel like it. I envied that. My room was small, but that wasn't the problem. The problem was that it had no memory. No past. No warmth. No stories held in the walls. I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. It was quiet. Too quiet. Silence in a new place is not peaceful. It is loud. It is heavy. It is space that has not yet learned your name. That night I tried to sleep, but my mind kept replaying everything I had left behind. Faces. Street corners. The way sunlight used to warm the walls in my home. The laughter of people who understood me without explanation. Memory became my comfort and my grief. The next morning I woke up early, not because I had to, but because my body didn't know how to rest. The house was dim. The heater made a low humming sound, constant, mechanical, impersonal. I looked out the window and saw frost covering the cars. I had never seen frost before. I reached out and touched the glass, cold against my fingertips, and realized that the world outside did not care who I had been before. The city was not waiting for me. No one was. This was the first real shock. You are not the center of anything anymore. You are a stranger, learning how to exist in a place that has no memory of you. Language became a wall. Every conversation was effort. Every sentence was a negotiation between who I used to be and who I was trying to become. I wanted to speak. I had things to say. Thoughts. Feelings. Personality. But the words didn't come the way I wanted. They came crooked, broken, slow. I smiled a lot. Not because I was happy, but because smiling was easier than explaining. Days blurred into one another. Everything was learning. How to buy food. How to take the bus. How to ask for help. How to hide confusion. How to appear calm when everything felt unfamiliar. The world here did not stop to let me adjust. It kept moving fast. And I followed, slowly. There were moments I wanted to cry. Not because something terrible happened, but because I felt far from myself. It wasn't the distance from my country that hurt the most. It was the distance from the version of myself who knew where they belonged. I didn't cry then. Not yet. The tears waited for winter. Winter would teach me things I wasn't ready to learn. Winter would strip me down to my core. Winter would show me the cost of becoming someone new. Winter did not arrive all at once. It came in fragments. First, the days shortened. The light disappeared earlier. Afternoons began to look like evenings, and evenings began to feel like midnight. Then the wind changed. It stopped brushing the skin and started cutting it. The world grew quiet, not silent but muted, as if everything was being covered by a thin sheet of cold. I remember walking to work one morning and seeing my breath for the first time. It floated in front of me like a small ghost, a reminder that the air itself was different here. Back home, breath was invisible. Here, even breathing felt foreign. I started wearing layers, 2 shirts, then 3, then 4. A coat that was too big for me. Gloves that didn't keep the cold out. A hat that made me feel like I was hiding. But winter doesn't only reach your skin. It reaches inward. The sidewalks were always wet. The sky was always gray. The streets always felt half empty even when people were there. People walked differently, heads down, shoulders tight, steps quick and silent. No one lingered. No one paused. No one looked at each other. And slowly my world became smaller. Homework, 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 sleep, wake, repeat. The routine was not what hurt. I understood routine. Routine had shaped my life before. What hurt was the silence inside the routine. Back home, even silence had texture. The sound of neighbors, of radios, of street vendors, of laughter traveling through open windows. Here, silence was empty. There were nights I came home and didn't hear a single voice for hours. Just the sound of the heater humming, constant, mechanical, lonely. I didn't know how to cook the way I used to. The ingredients felt wrong. The taste was close but never right. Food that once tasted like comfort now tasted like memory. And memory is not the same as nourishment. Some nights I ate just to keep going. Not to feel full. Not to feel good. Just to stay alive enough to try again the next day. The loneliness didn't come all at once. It arrived quietly. It arrived in the moment I couldn't remember the right word in English and chose to stay silent instead. It arrived in the moment I laughed at something alone because no one around me understood the joke I carried inside me. It arrived in the moment I realized the photos I brought from home were becoming harder to look at, because each time I looked, I remembered that life did not pause for me. Life went on. People grew. Things changed. And I was not there. The first time I cried, it was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was not cinematic. It was in the shower. Warm water running over cold skin. Steam rising, fogging the mirror. No audience. No explanation. Tears came because there was finally space for them. All day I had been holding myself together. Holding myself in place. Holding myself with my teeth clenched and my chest full. In the shower, the holding loosened. And everything I had been carrying fell to the floor. I cried because I was tired. I cried because I was far from everything familiar. I cried because I didn't know who I was becoming. Not the person I had been. Not yet the person I needed to be. Just the in-between. The unfinished version. The version made of questions. The version that exists between languages, between identities, between past and future. I cried for the first version of me, the one who thought leaving would be simple. I cried for the version who believed dreams only required courage. Dreams require rebuilding yourself. Dreams require letting go of who you were. Dreams require mourning the life that shaped you. No one tells you that part. People talk about opportunity. They talk about success. They talk about improvement. They don't talk about grief. They don't talk about how identity dissolves when it is not reflected in the eyes of others. They don't talk about how language shapes your personality, and how losing fluency means losing parts of yourself. That winter I barely spoke. Not because I had nothing to say, but because speaking required courage I didn't always have. I avoided conversations. I avoided being seen. I avoided making mistakes. Silence became my shield. But silence is heavy. Too heavy. There were nights I lay in bed and thought about going back. Not because I regretted leaving, but because I missed being known. Being understood without translation. Being read easily, the way people used to read me. Here I was a blank page. No one knew my past. No one knew my context. No one knew the softness of my heart or the weight I carried quietly. I felt invisible, and sometimes invisibility felt safer than vulnerability. But winter is patient. It stays. It stays past the point you think you can endure. It tests you. Not your strength, your spirit. I walked through it, day after day. Silent, cold, present. And slowly, very slowly, I began to understand something. I was not breaking. I was unfolding. The loneliness was not destroying me. It was carving space inside me for something new. Strength not loud but deep. Presence not forced but steady. Selfhood not borrowed but built. Winter did not take my voice. Winter taught me how to hear myself. And yes, I cried. But the tears were not failure. They were release. They were transformation. They were proof that my heart was still alive inside the cold. And that mattered more than anything else. Work became the center of my days. Not because I loved it, not because I felt connected to it, but because it was the only thing that had a clear shape. In a new country, everything feels uncertain except routine. Work became my routine. The alarm would ring before the sun rose. Sometimes it felt like I had closed my eyes only moments before it sounded again. The room would be dark, the air cold, and I would lie there for a few seconds, gathering myself. Not strength, just presence. Then I would get up, layer clothing, wrap myself in a coat that felt like armor, step outside into the cold that seemed to greet me before anything else did. The walk to work was quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet. There were others walking too, but we did not speak. We all carried the same unseen weight, survival. At work, the tasks were simple, but the silence was not. There is a particular silence that comes from not knowing how to say what you mean. A silence that grows between your thoughts and your tongue. A silence that makes you feel smaller each time it appears. My English was not just bad, it was fragile. The words came slow, broken, uncertain. I could understand more than I could say. And understanding is not the same as belonging. I wanted to speak. I had stories. I had humor. I had opinions. But when language becomes a wall, even your personality feels trapped behind it. There is a kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being unable to arrive in the conversation. So I worked in silence. I nodded. I listened. I learned to read tone, not words. I learned to respond with gestures, not sentences. And slowly I began to understand that silence was not emptiness, it was adaptation. Silence taught me to observe, to notice details, to see things others overlooked, the tired eyes, the stiff shoulders, the quiet sighs of people who were carrying their own invisible stories. Silence taught me humility, patience, restraint. But it also taught me something else, something harder. It taught me how much of identity comes from language. Back home I spoke easily. I expressed myself without thinking. I knew how to be understood. Words were fluid, natural, alive. Here speaking was effort, a performance, a negotiation with every sentence. And that effort made me feel like a smaller version of myself. Not because I was less, but because I was unfinished. There were moments at work when someone would joke and everyone would laugh, and I would laugh too even if I didn't fully understand. Not because I wanted to pretend, but because I wanted to belong. Belonging is a quiet hunger. No one talks about that hunger. They talk about survival, yes. They talk about sending money back home. They talk about opportunity. But belonging? Belonging is something else entirely. Belonging is what holds your soul together when your hands are tired. Belonging is what keeps you from disappearing inside yourself. And without language, belonging feels far away. There were days I came home from work and didn't speak a single sentence to anyone, not because I couldn't, but because I was tired of trying. Tired of the effort. Tired of the pauses. Tired of hearing my own voice sound foreign to me. But slowly, almost invisibly, something began to shift. I began to understand fragments of conversations. I began to recognize the rhythm of speech. I began to learn phrases that fit into certain moments. It was not fluency, but it was entry. And then one day someone asked me a simple question. Something small. Something ordinary. And without thinking, I answered, not perfectly, not clearly, but naturally. There was no pause. No hesitation. No fear. The sentence came out, whole. And in that moment, something inside me warmed. Not a blaze, just a spark. A reminder that language can be rebuilt. That identity can be carried. That voice can return. My English was still broken. But it was living. And living things grow. The silence did not disappear. But it changed. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space. Room to become. Room to adapt. Room to rebuild my voice slowly, gently, patiently. I was learning something I had never been taught before. Strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength is quiet endurance. And that endurance was shaping me into someone I had not expected. Someone stronger, softer, deeper than the person I had been before. I used to think change would feel like a breakthrough. Like one day I would wake up and everything would finally make sense. Like there would be a moment, one moment, where I would know I belonged. But that's not how transformation happens. Change is slow, quiet, invisible. It happens in small, almost forgettable moments. Moments like the first time you answer a question in English without thinking. The first time you understand a joke before it's explained. The first time the street outside feels less like somewhere and more like somewhere I know. Belonging doesn't arrive all at once. It grows, slowly, carefully, the way winter gives way to spring. But before it grows there is grief. The grief of realizing the person you once were is not the person you need to be now. I lost parts of myself. Yes, there is no point pretending otherwise. I lost the version of me who was confident in every sentence. I lost the version of me who knew how to walk into a room and feel familiar. I lost the version of me who didn't have to think so hard about being. But I gained someone too. Someone who could endure silence. Someone who could live without applause. Someone who could rebuild identity one word at a time. There is a strength that comes from being a foreigner that people who have never left home will never fully understand. The strength of waking up every day in a world that does not adjust for you. The strength of learning to translate yourself, not just your words but your heart. The strength of loving people who are far away and building a life with people who barely know your story. Over time, I began to notice that I was changing. Not on the outside but inside. The loneliness I once feared didn't disappear, but it softened. It no longer felt like emptiness. It felt like space, a space where something new could grow. I started to see beauty in the small things again. The way snowflakes gather in quiet patterns on window glass. The way morning light moves slowly across the kitchen. The way the air smells just before spring begins to arrive. And in those quiet moments I realized I was still alive inside myself. Even after everything. Even after the winter. Even after the silence. There were days I still cried. But the tears were different. They were not tears of loss. They were tears of recognition. Tears for the version of me who survived. Tears for the version of me who promised to keep going. Tears for the version of me who did not disappear in the cold. I began to understand something that took me a long time to accept. I am not from one place anymore. I am from every place that has held my footsteps. I am from every conversation that taught me how to speak again. I am from every silence that forced me to listen to myself. I live between worlds now. Between languages. Between cultures. Between memories and becoming. And instead of resisting that in-between space, I started to honor it. Because living in two worlds is not a loss. It is an expansion. I didn't just immigrate to a new country. I immigrated into a new version of myself. One who carries the past without trying to return to it. One who lives in the present without needing to erase what came before. One who understands that home is not a place you leave. It is something you carry. People sometimes ask me now, do you feel like you belong here? And my answer is simple. I belong where I stand. Because belonging is not something the world gives you. Belonging is something you build, clay in your hands, reshaped every day you continue. I'm not who I was before. And I am not who I was that first winter. I am the person who learned to stay. And that is something to be proud of. Sometimes, late at night, I find myself standing by the window. The world outside is quiet. The streetlights cast soft halos on the snow. The city, which once felt overwhelming, now feels almost gentle. And I think about that first winter. How heavy it was. How endless it felt. How I thought I might not make it through. I remember the cold that reached deeper than skin. I remember the silence that felt like it was swallowing me whole. I remember the loneliness that made my chest ache. And I remember crying, quietly, privately, without shape or explanation. Back then, my tears came from fear. From confusion. From the pain of losing the version of myself that had once felt whole. But now, when I cry, the tears are different. They come from recognition. From gratitude. From the knowledge of what I endured. They come from the understanding that I did not break. I changed. I grew. I softened. I expanded. I became someone who can survive winter, outside and inside. People sometimes think strength looks loud, like confidence or certainty or fearlessness. But my strength was quiet. It was waking up again even when I didn't know how. It was speaking even when my words shook. It was staying even when leaving felt easier. My English was bad. My courage was small. My heart was tired. But my dream was clear. And that clarity carried me. Now, I no longer cry because I am lost. I cry because I found myself, not the old version, not the broken version, but the version that grew in the cold. The version that learned to belong to more than one world. The version that learned to hold home inside itself. And if you are somewhere in your own winter right now, please remember this. Your tears are not weakness. They are proof you are still alive inside. And one day you will cry too, but for different reasons.